I call the city council meeting to order. This is September 12th, 2023, and calling to order at 6:01. Kathy, would you lead the Pledge of Allegiance tonight? I'm sorry, Councilor Engelbretson.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty. Tammy, would you do roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor Bell.
Here.
Counselor Blaine is absent. Counselor Engelbretson.
here.
Counselor Fox is absent. Counselor Lehman.
Here.
Counselor Smith.
Here.
And Counselor Wells.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Thank you. Are there any proposed changes to tonight's agenda?
Yes, Mayor, in your red folder, there's 3 documents in there. One of them is a voting and abstaining information sheet. It will go under agenda item 9. Excuse me, agenda item 8. Agenda item 9, the city administrator's report is in the red folder that was emailed out to you guys last week, but there's a printed copy for everybody. And then the public improvement contract for the Coburg Operation and Operations Storage Building Unit. There was a proposed amendment to Exhibit B that Adam will explain later during that council item that is also in the red folder.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sammy. Well, first of all, I would like to acknowledge I love fall. I love the change of seasons. I love the start of school. I love all those things. But today is September 12th. That means that 20 plus years ago, yesterday, we all were impacted, no matter where we lived. We had loved ones that we worried about. We didn't know what was going to happen on the West Coast, even though that was on the East Coast. Our lives changed forever. And I watched the specials yesterday, and of course I always cry when I watch those because there were so many people, brave people that lost their lives, that continued on and continue to lose their lives today because of the exposure to the toxins that were there. So I just need to take just that minute and acknowledge, and I know that you all understand that, and certainly any of us that have traveled on airlines since September 11th have always understood that too. So thank you for bearing with me. I can never let that day go. I still remember Pearl Harbor Day, not that I was alive at Pearl Harbor, but my dad's birthday was December 7th, and he was also a World War II vet. And like that, he remembered where he was when he heard. I think we probably all remember where we were when JFK was shot, where we were when Martin Luther King was shot, where we were when Robert Kennedy was shot. I think we'll all in this room remember where we were when 9/11 happened. Thank you for bearing with me on that. And now on to a happier subject. We have a Domestic Violence Awareness Month proclamation, and many of us here have been, I know that's not really a happier note, I'm just being a little facetious, but I think we've all been impacted in one way or another, or most of us have either known somebody or been close to somebody that has been impacted by domestic violence. And I'd just like to take this moment to go over the proclamation. Sammy, should I read all of the whereases? Those are a lot of whereases. Yes, okay. I was going to, but then I thought I best check.
Yeah.
Whereas domestic violence is a prevalent societal problem harming victims, their children, family, friends, and communities at large. And whereas domestic violence is a serious crime that affects people of all race, age, gender, economic, religious, educational, societal barriers, and income level. And whereas domestic violence is defined as abusive behavior in a personal relationship that gives one member control and power over another through physical, emotional, sexual, economic, or psychological actions or threats. And whereas 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience domestic violence during his or her lifetime, about 1 in 10 teenagers will face deliberate violence from someone they are dating, and about 1 in 15 children are exposed to intimate partner violence in the home each year. And whereas in Oregon, 39.8% of women and 36.2% of men experience intimate partner domestic violence in their lifetimes. Excuse me, lots of whereases. And whereas Domestic Violence Awareness Month provides an excellent opportunity for citizens to learn more about preventing domestic violence and for increasing the public's awareness of domestic violence. Now, therefore, I, Nancy Bell, Mayor of the City of Coburg, Oregon, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2023 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month in the City of Coburg. Residents are encouraged to observe this month by gaining awareness about societal problem of domestic violence throughout our community and its devastating effects on families and communities. Proclaimed this 12th day of September 2023. And as we read the police report each month, we know that we here in Coburg, even though it is a small town, certainly have our share. And it is a ongoing issue that creates many ripples. Thank you for listening to me on those 2 topics. Sammy, is there anyone signed up to provide citizen testimony?
Nope.
I will ask under or comment under mayor's comments. This month, we're having 2 meetings. We're meeting tonight and then we're meeting September 26th. And I believe that will be a work session with the Planning Commission also, because we'll be talking about code review and ordinances and things that impact all of us. So one of the questions that has come up, and I'm sure you all noticed that this packet tonight is significantly smaller than some of them that we see, and that can be for a variety of reasons. But one of the things that we need to think about, we do have the opportunity every month. The second Tuesday of each month is always city council meeting, but I believe the 4th Tuesday of every month is scheduled as a work session or penciled in as a work session. One of the things that we could do, and I want you all to think about this, is rather than having 1 city council meeting a month with a sometimes huge packet and long meeting, do we want to do 2 council meetings per month? And that does not have to start right now. That doesn't have to start this, and we could start that in 24. But I do want you all to think about if it would be more reasonable to have 2 with shorter agendas each month. You don't have to answer right now. Just think about it and let me know your thoughts and we'll move forward. But again, we do have that fourth Tuesday of the month sort of penciled in as a work session. So, and I think we'll be having a fair number of meetings on the fourth Tuesday of the month anyway. Okay, now I really am finished with my little mayor's comments. So we have no special guests. We have no ordinances or resolutions to go through tonight. Get my actual agenda out here.
Mayor will need to do the consent agenda.
Oh, thank you so much. I skipped right over that. So counselors may remove any item from the consent agenda for discussion by requesting such action prior to consideration. Are there any changes to the consent agenda? If not, I will accept a motion to accept those and move forward.
I move to accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
That was a motion by Counselor Engelbretson and a second by Counselor Fox. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So let's see. Aye, 5 in favor and none opposed. And so that passes as presented. And with the city council, I will appoint Terry Dawson, Colleen Marshall, and Elise Landry to the Finance Audit Committee for 2 years expiring in June of 2025. Is that okay with everybody? Thank you. We will let them know they have both, well, Terry and Colleen have served on that committee for a long time. Elise is fairly new, probably the last year, but does an excellent job. Thank you. No special guests, no ordinances or resolutions tonight. We do have council action items. And the first one on the agenda is the operations storage building contract, and that was the red folder item. Right, yes. And what were the changes on that, Adam?
Yeah, we can go through the a little bit of a staff report, but the item that was in the red folder is just a change to the contract, one of the exhibits, and it was a recommendation from legal staff to swap the language that was more of a goods and services exhibit and exchange that for this document, the 2 yellow pages, which are a public improvements contract code references. So a suggestion in kind of the 2 different types of procurement methods. So minor, nothing substantial to the, the term of the contract, the basics. It's an exhibit for legal compliance.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like me to hop into the item and
Sure.
do a quick little?
It's fairly dense. It would probably be helpful to have you go through that with us.
Sure. This is a project, that has been in the works long before I arrived, of course. Staff is really excited. We're at this point of being able to present a recommendation for award of the contract. The building, as noted in the staff report, will be really helpful for public works staff and for the protection of our equipment and for maintenance, for repair, and as well as office space and storage facilities for public works. The staff recommendation is to award the construction contract to Wildish Building Company, contract price of $1,324,000 and change. Should council award the contract, it would be executed probably within this week and start off with pre-construction meetings as soon as possible, with a contract completion date anticipated to be July 26th of 24. So it's a The goal is a tight building window. This was originally scheduled for last month's council agenda. As you saw on the agenda, it was pulled. The reason for that, there was a protest to the award. The materials in the packet kind of detail some of the technicalities of the procurement process, that how the selection was made, as this was not the lowest price bidder, but it, as we clarified multiple times within the documents and correspondence with the other bidder, it was the lowest price responsible bidder. And that is a ORS definitions. You have to be a responsive and responsible bidder, and then the dollars are what's looked at. So those are the considerations for public improvement procurement. So that has been concluded. The protest period is over. The any action now can move forward by council. Really, in your role here as the local contract review board, that is the ORS designation for how councils deal with contracts of the city. Let's see, that material is in there. We talked about the replacement exhibit B already, that was in the red folder. The only correction then or added piece I would say is the requested council action in the packet just needs to be amended with the words as amended when you talk about the public improvements contract. Just if you're utilizing that motion. So that's a quick recap. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Councilor Lehman.
Yeah, so this seemed to be kind of a messy process in terms of back and forth between Cynthia Denny and the city, and it just seemed to be that they were held not to be responsible and necessarily timely in filing their appeal, one thing, and two, it seemed to be a discrepancy between whether they had the experience of doing metal fabrication structures. They seem to think that we didn't reach out to them to check their references, or that they had provided for us, and maybe a lack of communication with that. Overall, do you see any lessons learned from this experience, or did we do everything that we should have done?
I would say always lessons learned. It's a great question. Always lessons learned, even when things go smooth. This one, I have been involved, not as directly in prior locations with protests. They aren't super common, but they aren't really unusual because of the way public contracting works. And a lot of times the protests are just an awareness and a request to basically get more information and make sure that they understand for their own purposes next time how things went. So I've had protests that are purely educational. I don't know that this one was particularly that. I would say the lessons learned, we have some consistency of our own bid packet and ordinances to state law that I would like to look at to compare, which is common for cities to have somewhat more stringent procurement ordinances than what the minimums that state law requires. My general take on that is, as you want to be as close as you can to the state law as possible. And so any exceptions really need to be well thought out, because it can create confusion about what the standard is, and mistakes can get made a little bit more easily there. But other than that, what we are sending back to our legal staff is our template for bid package, just to have them review it for those inconsistencies. One of them was the question of the 5-day versus 7-day. What is the definition? Is that calendar or business? And it just wasn't spoken to. So we did not deny the protest based on those things, because there wasn't absolute clarity in some of those. But the part that is absolutely clear, what the basis of denying the protest was the responsible bidder component. And I think that's important. And that was pretty unanimous from a technical standpoint, from the legal staff, and a professional standpoint from the engineering and public works staff. So yes, lessons learned. And I think we can look at our bid sets, our contracts, which is one that we caught at the very end there, that exhibit, that will be part of a permanent correction for public improvement contracts. But overall, I think really the process worked as it's intended to work in state law, and giving bidders an opportunity to understand why the selections were made as they were.
If I may, just point of clarification here. Most of us will remember the wheelchair access ramp down at Johnny Diamond. So the company that put in the appeal on the bid was the company that worked on Johnny Diamond Park. They were very slow in correcting that wheelchair access ramp. There were, in talking to Public Works staff, there were issues sort of all along the way that just didn't quite meet the level of experience I think that we were looking for in responsiveness. I actually took the liberty and went out and checked their website. What I found on their website is it looked like they'd done parks and they had done remodels and round up building of homes, but there were not any buildings that such as we're talking about for the building, at least on their website. So that was sort of my little digging about.
Councilor Lehman, maybe one more piece that I didn't answer as part of yours is, the communication part, the back and forth that was referenced. That's a pretty clear process as well. And really, as public contracting and bid processes, they're required to submit. It's very clear what is required to submit. And so I think you have to be very careful on the reviewing side to deviate and have offline conversations, one-off conversations, because that then leads to other bidders saying, what occurred there, what did you allow in after the duty, all of that. So really the kind of the rules of public procurement are to follow the procedures explicitly, because that's the most fair and equitable for every bidder that's there. And it can lead to some of those feelings, I think, of saying, well, all you had to do was call me. Well, that's not necessarily consistent with ORS. So it really is a very technical legal process. And it is sometimes awkward to look at, when obviously it's a public record and all of that stuff. But that was just an added, I forgot to touch on when you mentioned that communication piece.
I also had a question on the calendar for initiating your appeal, whether it was calendar days, but also it would be nice to know if the day that the contract is awarded, which was the 31st, does that day count as part of the 5? Because if it's awarded on the 31st and they had 5 business days, it would have been due on the 5th, but the 5th was a Friday, so it spilled over to the Monday. But is there a timeline for, if that bid is not announced until 6 o'clock or 5:30 in the evening, then does that count as day 1?
Right, and that's some of the difference of having the bid packet not necessarily explicitly match ORS. It can be done. ORS allows local jurisdictions to have standards that are different. But that is one of the pieces that we'll look at for consistency, because when you do follow that, those definitions are built in ORS. We didn't have that to lean on, which is again why, for clarity, the legal distinction is the responsive bidder component. There were other elements that were confusing, I think there was a series of things that are all laid out in the package and correspondence, but the end result is the responsiveness, or the responsible part. There were some responsiveness issues, but yeah, getting to Councilor Lehman's question, those are things I think we can clean up. But the responsible bidder part is clear and pretty objective, and really, like I say, backed up by both of our 2 legal staff, our professional engineering team, and our public works and myself. So feel very firm and comfortable in the recommendation that we have in front of you.
Councilmember Hudson.
Yeah, I was also just curious. It kind of looked like some of the sort of confusion may have been around specifically what the scope was of the bid, at least according to the applicant that wrote, protested, or at least that's how I read it. And I was curious, I noticed on our the building project bid sheet where the bidder will go through and list what the price they think they're going to charge for everything. I noticed that the buildings, there's building 1 and building 2, they're just listed as one line item in a whole lump sum, and the contractor is supposed to put in a whole lump sum for a whole building. So we have like one line item here that's, $800,000 or $900,000 with no detail. I was just curious if that's typical. And also, like, when I've done, construction for like a house, you don't have one line item, you have the excavation or the site prep, you have the foundation, you have the big elements of the building, so that the people perhaps have a better opportunity to make sure they're addressing all of the items that are in scope, and therefore that the bidders are not sort of leaving something out of the bid thinking that it wasn't needed, or you know what I'm saying? It's easier to compare apples to apples from one bid to another. If there, maybe we have a little more detail, might be able to spot if one of the bidders is missing something, like, why didn't you fill out the HVAC? Oh, I didn't think that was in the scope. Oh, yes, it is. Okay, I'll fill it out. Just that kind of, I don't know, just a thought. As I was reading it, I thought that that was perhaps something that we could make a little more granular, that might actually help us and the bidders.
I think we may want to separate the kind of process change, process improvement components from the bid that's already completed and the process that's been completed. I don't disagree
Yes,
that there are
I'm
ways
looking
to,
forward, yes.
yeah, to look at that, but this bid process, complied with all of the Oregon Revised statutes. It complied, the bid set was complete, and that, there are some, there's some things that we could talk about why, why they're set up the way they are. But, again, glad we will be bringing some information back to you on generally on procurement, and if there are any suggestions to be made on the mostly the ordinance, kind of from the policy side, because this is really the administrative component is the review of the bids and setting up the bid process, and then then making sure that it complies with both state law and local ordinance. But those points that I'll definitely note down, and we can talk about them in the future.
Councilor Fox.
So interesting point that Councilor Abramson brings up, because one of my minutia questions, and this is based on a tour that I had with Brian of the wastewater plant, and highly impressive tour in our facility. Except I was crestfallen at one point when I found out that the halogen lights are left on 24/7 because they take so long to warm up, and if they need to come out there, and I'm like, oh my God, we have this beacon of light in Coburg in the dark area. That's, anybody who knows me, that's a real personal issue of mine. But I'm hoping there are LED lights buried in that bid and not any halogen lights or that's the point for the future. They're consume a lot of energy and they take a long time to warm up, so you have to leave them on 24/7.
I will check on that and make sure we're okay on that.
How many bidders were there? I'm sorry, how many bidders were there for this project?
There were 6, I believe.
6.
Which is, is a challenge these days to get bidders. So this project, I think because of the type of project, it was not as specific as some of the, the very complex, wastewater plant is very different than an operations and storage building. So this one, I think was expected to gain more bidders than we've typically seen in other projects, and it did.
More out of curiosity, how big is the building? The square footage?
I believe it's 4,400 or so square feet.
Mr. Harmon.
Yeah.
It's between, I think it's 44 or 46. It's just under 5,000.
Yeah.
It is the same exact footprint as the current operations facility.
And Wildish was the second lowest bid.
Correct.
No, no kidding.
Counselor Lehman.
So it was about $300,000 less than first and second bid. In part, she said that significant savings was they were able to get a lot of materials directly rather than through a second middleman. Was that like $60,000, I think, savings by doing that?
That, I can't speak to the innards of the bid and what their strategies were. And that's part of the question, that the reason these are not done at a detailed level like that. The bids are by major component. Those are often individual strategies about how they're going to get to where they're going to get. So the bid is designed, and that's, for, again, getting back, those are related to your question about how these are structured and what public contracting allows and what level of specificity. So I don't have an answer that she raised. She put forward a lot of other detail that, only due to the protest were they even in the record for you to review. They otherwise would not be part of the record.
I think we're beyond the protest or the appeal at this point, and really just looking at the contract as it is in form. There are other questions, comments? If not, I will accept a motion. And remember, if you're going to make the motion, do it as improvement contract as amended. Have the amendment and as a red folder item.
Yes, I make a motion to approve the contract with Wildish Building Company for the public improvement contract. On this contract number as presented in the folder.
Second.
We have a motion by Counselor Wells and a second by Counselor Fox to approve the public improvement contract as amended with Wildish Paving Company doing business as Wildish Building Company to construct the operations storage building. Is there any further discussion? And all those in favor, please say aye.
I
Any opposed? Measure or motion passes 5-0. Now we have the bargain and sale deed, to remove access restriction strip. Mr. Hanks, will you walk us through that, please?
Sure. This one's a little more, well, that one was technical as well. This one is another kind of administrative technical item that because of one little quirk requires it to go to council. So the property that we were talking about in the bargain and sale deed is what's called an access reserve strip. It's a pretty common survey control tool that ensures that the city maintains control of how new development accesses rights of way. It basically can blocks kind of unauthorized utilization of a right of way, either during construction or long term. For then the city has the control to kind of unlock that and then allow it in a future development approval. Typically, these reserve strips, when they're created, they are administratively handled and converted to public right of way. That's the common, it's the most common way they're utilized. And with the bargain and sale deed that provided this strip to the city, it includes language that authorizes the city administrator to designate it as right of way, because it stays in public ownership. It's being deeded to the city and it's just converted to right of way. In this case, on this strip tonight, as you see in the packet materials, the far right component of this, a very small, probably about 20% or less of the strip, is actually not being converted back to right of way. Rather, it's being the bargain and sale deed grants that back to the developer and has it become a component of that lot 35. So the action in front of you is to authorize the approval of the bargain and sale deed that gives that the portion in red back to the developer who granted it to us in the first place, and the remainder, the yellow, does convert to right of way as would have been done administratively by itself. And again, just to point out that it's a $0 transaction. It's just a movement of ownership back. So.
Questions? Counselor Fox?
My eye for detail is missing. What is the red line for?
I think it's the next page.
Red line
The-
is the property that would be
Okay,
deeded back.
The idea was to visually try and show the difference between the two types
Okay.
of that whole thing. The red and yellow combined is the strip.
okay,
The red is the portion that goes to private property that triggers the need for this action.
okay.
And that's because behind lot 35, there is another dwelling currently.
No, it was right of way. So it was basically the excess strip was to take the entire frontage of the large parcel and ensure that the city had control of any part of that parcel that touched city right of way. And so now that has a parcel there, and it won't connect to city right of way.
Question.
Counselor Wells?
Or lot number 35 is owned by Weicker, right?
It's being created. Yeah, but it will be, yes, that right now it's
Site prep at this point.
so once this is complete with the bargain and sale, that would this would go along with the signature of the survey plat that then creates all of the lots in phase 2.
And just some background, because you weren't here, but there was a lot of disagreement as to the design of that phase 2, actually the entire subdivision, because at one time they were going to access the subdivision off of Skinner.
Mhm.
And there was a group of neighbors, myself included, that really put a lot of time and effort and money into making sure that that never happened. And I have to be honest, without sounding overly dramatic here, I'm still not entirely trustworthy of Weichert and their ability to somehow manipulate the rules, the lot configuration, accesses, who owns private, what is owned by them, what isn't, such that they might someday be able to use that Skinner Street as access. And I guess my question to you is, why are we doing this? Why do we need to do this? Is it a request that they're making, or is it just, I mean, why do we need to do anything at this point? I never recall, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember us agreeing to give them back that strip of property. Am I wrong about that?
First I heard of it.
It is a tiny strip, I think, that we're talking about.
I guess my answer would, I have been kind of prepped on some of that history.
Okay.
An access control strip could be left alone. It isn't required to be done. I think it would be an oddball leftover piece that actually, I'm not sure of I don't know that there's an advantage to keeping it, especially the portion that would then be, we'd have 1 foot by 60 foot of land that we control behind lot 35.
But yeah, but this
Go ahead.
discussion, okay, but then it makes that entire parcel privately owned, and we have no buffer between Van Dyne Street and their privately owned lot, correct? And could they, I mean, I think that's right, and couldn't they at that time say, oh, we're not going to develop lot 35, and someday down the road say, you know what, it would be great to have an access through lot 35, and because we own it, there's really nothing we can do at that point.
Well, I would, at this point, I would have to, look back at the entire subdivision approval. The creation of that lot would not allow, this entirety here creates lots 35, 36, 37, and it also creates in between 35 and 36, a public access, a non-vehicular public access, if you look
And I
at that,
think
right?
That
Right.
non-vehicular
Right.
public access, if I am correct on this, and certainly correct me if I'm not, I think that goes to Skinner.
Yeah, that's
Correct.
kind of the
Access.
extension.
That's
Exactly.
the Public access that, and it is in the final approval documents that will not be converted into a road.
No, that wouldn't be. I grant you that, but why would, if I'm, there's a house kind of at the end of Skinner.
On the right-hand side.
Exactly.
Mhm.
It wouldn't be unthinkable that Weichert buys that house, then he has the house that's on the downside of lot 35, and he has lot 35. That becomes a pretty attractive access to that subdivision. And there's not a whole lot we can do about it. I mean, I don't think.
Well, Skinner is still our street. So
was-
yes, I
so it
believe
would
there
be-
is.
You're thinking it'd be an extension of Skinner that we wouldn't
Would have to
allow?
be. We-
Right.
We will not approve new roads going, streets going. We have a street grid. A map, an ordinance, I'm not ever quite sure what, but our zoning has street grids in it. And that they cannot create a new street. If you recall, to have them come out on Macy, they did buy that property, and I think that may be what you're thinking about. And then they said, look, we'll give you this property. We'll give you this property so that we can have that second access out of the subdivision.
Totally agree. And that's what I'm concerned.
That would not happen. They cannot create a street that is not there.
But if I'm
Unless
him,
we
I'm saying, well,
agree.
this is actually just an extension of Skinner.
They, I
Really?
hear you, but I don't think
City
they can.
property.
It is city property. They cannot
No,
do that.
you're right. It is city property up to that
Truly.
red line, but then that red line and tax lot or that lot 35 becomes
They would
private.
still have to hook into Skinner, which we have said that cannot be, that is not wide enough for a two-way street.
Just wonder why
Question.
haven't they taken it?
Or what, if there was as nefarious as a concept as this, as a city, couldn't we put one of those guardrails in? That
I think we'll have bullards in there or whatever they're called, bollards, what are they
Bollards.
called?
Hopefully it would never get to that.
Those Things.
I mean, that would be all right to put a blockage so that you couldn't drive a car there.
10 years from now, they have never developed tax or lot 35, right? They own all of lot 35, including what we used to have as a barrier between Van Dyne and 35. And he approaches us saying, you know what, we could really, there's a lot of traffic on Coleman, which there already is, by the way, and I've had more than a few people approach me about that. Why don't we just extend Skinner through lot 35 and into our subdivision? We own the property anyway. I'm talking as though I'm Weichert. 10 years from now, we forget this happened, and all of a sudden now we have that extension of Skinner Street that they were asking for. I just don't know what is the advantage to giving that up? Why just that little piece of it and not the whole frontage on Van Dyne Street?
I may have misspoke. Let me correct, and maybe we should have put we thought about doing this and I didn't do it. Is doing a zoom out, because this one is the subdivision itself. So the stripe, but the red piece does not butt on up against what is now right of way. And I think I misunderstood that. It does not. So
It
there
butts
is.
Up against another.
It bumps up
private
against another
property.
property. So any way you slice it, even if it did butt up against right of way, there are multiple tools. You're right. You could, if it was already right of way there, we control it anyway. We wouldn't, so the strip at this point, the strip is a tool that is designed for development in progress. And when a development is platted and completed, the need for that tool goes away.
But Adam, it hasn't been completed. He's just starting on phase 2. And that,
It's platting, it's the legal lot creation and right of way creation of phase two is what I mean. No, I understand he's not completed building it, but the land use approval is complete. Public improvements permit has been issued, and now they are legally allowed to come forward to have us review and sign the plat. And the plat then creates the lots, and then they can build individual homes, you know, all of that, right? So, so we have regulatory control.
Yeah.
So the question, we have it now. The question is, does council want to retain an unnecessary strip there? Because it doesn't accomplish anything additional for the city.
Who made this request, if I can add? To remove that?
The surveyors, when they submit the plat, that is to do something with that strip.
Were employed by Bikert.
Well, and same with our surveyors that review, you know, branch engineering surveyors that review it. That is that
We do respect the same branch engineering that approved Skinner as an access to that subdivision to begin with. So I'm sorry if I'm a
They're not
little
an
brittle about this, but it's just, you know, we spent a year fighting this darn thing. And I just don't trust that if there's no need to do this, why do it?
So you'd have that 1 foot strip of land that doesn't belong to anybody. I mean, belongs to us, and then we maintain it.
between two
That's- Yeah.
properties. And I think, sorry that I got us maybe down the path by saying that that I don't know the original reason that was extended there in the first place, where the right of way, because from the yellow on is the part of Van Dyne that doesn't seem to be Van Dyne. It looks more like a flag drive, but it is a public right of way. So it was to take care of that situation. That is very normal. And this was the anomaly that maybe wasn't, you know, caught in the first phase, that this access strip needed to be as long as it was to the east, because it really, I don't think did anything in the first place. So the benefit, I think it, you know, from an administrative and a survey and a management of rights of way, clearly the yellow, the normal part of this would be something that, again, wouldn't come to council. It's handled administratively because it's the cleanest. It becomes right away because that's what its use is anyway. This piece, theoretically, council could choose to not approve the bargain and sale deed. That 1 foot strip remains. I'm not certain what other trip ups, if any, could happen in the future. I'm pretty confident that there isn't anything extra to be gained by having it. There could be some, you know, there could be something, you know, in the future of the sale of lot 35 that, or there's a setback question, and what's the setback? Is it using the 1 foot? Is it not using the 1 foot? You know, there's just some of those, it is, you know, kind of lower. It's a very effective tool during development. The access strips, they're not very useful once the platting has happened and the rights of ways are determined. And that's really the piece. It's determining the legal rights of ways to connect to.
As I recall, we did something like this at Coburg Crossing in the Hayden Home development. That we released some little piece of land. Do you remember, Mr. Harmon?
Brian, do you want to come up? Yeah,
Come up, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
You don't
I
remember?
know it's on scores. I think that's the spot you're referring
That
to.
may well
So
be.
It's the property that abutted the Serenity Lane fence. I believe you're
That's-
absolutely right, and that was actually a little bit bigger area, if I'm not.
But it was not going to
certain-
serve any purpose to keep it as city property.
That is correct. I
Just
believe that's correct.
And that's the case, that the effectiveness of the tool really goes away once the right of ways are platted and you've signed a plat that legally connects the street network, as the mayor was mentioning. So that there isn't, once it's platted, there isn't a way to, without starting all the way from scratch as a request, to council through a pre-app, public works improvements and street standards, all that, to ask that question of making that connection.
Oh, sure. No, I get that. I
Yeah.
mean, I know we'd have a lot of roadblocks, but if I own 35, I own that red strip of land, I own the house next to it, I have a clear path to my subdivision. And someday down the road, I could say, I'm going to give this property to you so that we can extend Skinner
But
Street.
we're not going to accept it.
Well, you and me
No, I
won't,
know,
but
I
you know,
know,
15
I-
years from now, and so give them an easement to use that red strip, but don't give them the property.
So I guess I would say the practical answer is they'd have to ask your approval anyway, whether you had that red strip there or not, they still have to ask your approval. So they're asking your approval for two things instead of one thing, but they still have, so it's kind of redundant. They're going to need yours or a future council's approval regardless. So the common practice would be to eliminate kind of this survey detail, because it doesn't add any additional long-term protections.
Boy,
Councilor Lyman.
we put that in a frame and hang it.
No,
I mean, I'm sorry, I don't trust that. Not that I don't trust him. He's a good guy and he's a developer that will use any means possible to get access to the property off of Skinner. Had we not had a pretty good city council, and you all sat on that council, thank you. That was a hard fought battle. And I don't want to go down
This has
that
been an
road again.
emotional and very trying
Yeah.
issue for
Well,
all of us.
And
involved.
Councilor Wells, I do appreciate the conversation. I think it's really good. It is, in the weeds a bit, but sometimes those weeds are the things to understand and really matter. And it was, to me, it was a helpful talk through. Hopefully it was for all of us, to make sure that we know, the impacts of the actions that council is taking. So that's the goal every time, is to make sure that we're all clear on what the impacts of the requested action are. So hopefully, I understand where you're going with that. And I guess my conclusion is that, it is a redundant protection. There are no more legal protections with it than without it.
Councilor Lyman and then Councilor Smith.
So on page 54 under background, it says the reserve strip would remain in place until such time as development occurs, lot 27. I'm looking at figure 1 and figure 2, and I don't see 27.
Part of phase 2.
Be
Yeah.
part of phase 1.
So the
think-
background is phase 1.
Lot 27 is listed. It's the big piece. That's the part that actually is phase 2. See the 27 in the middle of the big parcel on the left.
Oh,
I
Yeah.
see 30, 29, 28.
On figure 1,
Oh, so 27 went away.
27 is the
Owned
parent
by
is
all
a parent
these-
parcel to phase 2's plat that we're talking about now.
Phase 2, figure 2, the entire amount is number 27.
it's so confusing and they're so small. I need my real big magnifiers. Counselor Smith.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I'm not knowledgeable about this, very confusing, but with this 1 by 60-foot strip. Just for clarification, are they wanting that deeded back to make it easier to develop lot 35? Does it become a part of lot 35 after a home is built, or does it remain a part of just a open space strip that Reichert
That's
retains?
what
It-
we're,
It becomes part of lot 35, and it doesn't make it more or less buildable. I suppose it changes the setback, the rear yard setback slightly. Yeah.
So would it make sense to compromise possibly? I understand Ellen's concerns because of development is always sticky. But would it make sense to wait until that lot is purchased and going to be built on, and then deed that to the owner of the lot as opposed to deeding it to.
That's
Because if their truly intent is to build a home, and I think it probably is. But would it make sense then for us to abandon that 1 by 60 foot strip after a home has been built on it and it's deeded to the owner? Therefore, Wyker has no control over it. The owner would have to grant access if that
Yep.
goes down the road.
Couple things that would occur with that. The first, again, it's a redundant set of controls. City has control still, even without it. As when the plat gets signed, the city, still has control over making whether that becomes any sort of public access to Skinner. Absolute city control. So that part doesn't change with the scenario you talked about. What would change is the new owner would have to apply, or we would have to apply for a lot line adjustment. So the time you typically do it is now when it's being platted. So there isn't then a land use action for a lot line adjustment later.
Would it make sense to do the lot line adjustment as opposed to abandoning it to Wyker?
I guess
I understand Alan's concern, and I think that throughout the course of history in Coburg, it's very typical for the sitting council to understand it very clearly and know the history. But as council changes, as land changes ownership, priorities change, and oftentimes the best of intentions for long-term solutions become muddied and lost in future councils, future decisions. I mean, I think that if they hadn't fought so hard for Skinner to be an access, I'd feel more comfortable saying, we trust you, sure. I too feel kind of anxious about the fact, and I know the city would have the right of approval. And if all of the people on Skinner Street said, great, traffic can go there at that time, but again, it goes back to the citizens who live on the street to have to go back through another process of saying, we settled this 10 years ago, now it's back on the board, we still don't want it, and it personal expense, and I guess that's my concern.
I guess I just, don't repeat myself too much, but this strip does not provide any additional protections or benefit to that potential scenario occurring, because regardless, the whoever owned that, whether it was the current owner or a future owner, they always to have a right of way connection. It is a connection to the city's system and the city's right of way. So the request would be the same regardless of the strip. The only added thing would be a note at the bottom that says, surveyor, please note that this strip needs to be, dedicated to right of way as well. I don't know that the developer, isn't they're not requesting this necessarily. It's just a part of a plat process is to clean these up when they're no longer a useful tool to the city. So that's really, the nuts and bolts of it. When it's no longer a useful tool, it's wiped off, and the time to do it is when all of it's being created, at that, and then it goes to the county, gets all surveyed and closed out. So again, I get, it's the usefulness of the tool has expired with the platting. That's just, I guess, the end of it.
I hate to belabor this because I don't want this to go on forever, but has the tool gone away? I mean, it was to prevent access for construction vehicles or otherwise off of Van Dyne, right? And the phase 2 is just starting. So what would prevent them from using this as a temporary access to get their construction traffic in and out of the site? I don't think, I know they would have to come to us and say, can we use that as access? But why couldn't they?
Well, the streets, the streets are, if you've been out there, the streets are, prepped. It's not paved yet, but they're the prep. So the right of way configuration is laid out. They put the subgrade down there. They'll be doing curb and gutter. They'll be doing all that stuff. So accessing the back of these lots 37, 36, and 35. 35 actually, there's another property there. So 35 would even be harder to access. So 36 and 37.
Get it? Yeah.
It,
It wouldn't be the easiest access, I grant you that.
One of the reasons that there is so much traffic on Coleman, which
There's no other way
is
to get in.
because there's no other way in or out.
Right.
And because Macy now has been prepped to connect.
Right.
But we still have some work to do on our side, on the city side, in terms of what that looks like. So they're not even, with rare exceptions, they may take a vehicle in there once in a while. They certainly had to when they were prepping it, because I called and went, I think you're getting ahead of us. I don't think you're supposed to do that. And I was calmed down and now understand what they were doing. So yeah, there has been no activity, and I walk down there a lot.
Every day.
But there's been no activity or action to try and bring vehicles in there. And they couldn't, as Mr. Hank said, they couldn't bring them in through 35 because there is a property that abuts that.
That's your money he's bought that.
No.
You don't
has
think he
not.
has?
No,
Oh, God.
no.
I'm sure they've
It,
approached it.
it is part of public record and has not been sold. Yes, oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Brandon Brunson.
Yeah, I certainly understand the concerns, obviously. I'm actually a little more in favor of moving forward and play the devil's advocate, I guess, with the proposal, since this is the standard practice for these reserve strips. I'm buying into Adam's argument here that it's not helping us. If they wanted to do this, they could apply to do it, whether the reserve strip is there or not. Part of it, and if we remember, I don't think the developer was as interested in taking access from Skinner as was the city planner at that time. That's no longer here.
You are correct.
The other thing is, I think this is an example of why we need to have the planning code discussion, the development code discussion, because I think I would like us to think about what we might put into our code that will help the city to have a little stronger teeth when new development when we need to expand outward and new development comes in. We need something in our code to help guide how these connections happen in a way that better than what we have today, what we have had, which has been very confusing, and we've gone back and forth, and we've given away some of the right of way that we should have kept we've given away the center of a street before in the past to the residents that live on either side of the street. Those kind of things. I think if we think through how we could put a little bit more guidance for our future commissioners and counselors into our code, then we can hopefully avoid some of these situations. Now, the hard part about what I just said is how do you write the code language to convey this? Anyway, I think I won't take up any more time as I've made my point. Thank you.
Willing to make a motion,
All right, Counselor Fox is willing to make a motion.
see where it goes. I move to approve the sale of the access restriction strip north of East Van Dyne Street for $0 and authorize bargain and sale deed to be executed.
Have a second.
I'll second.
Counselor Smith has seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Me.
One opposed. Thank you. So that is 4 in favor and 1 opposed. Thank you. That was great discussion. I think that does lead us down other discussions that will occur in the future.
Welcome to Coburg.
This is great, seriously.
There's a
This is great.
Around anytime we grow and change, and I think that's important to recognize. We all are struggling. Change is hard. Change is difficult. So, technical assistance grant application approval. Hanks.
All
would you like
right.
to talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, this one maybe gets to kind of the conclusion of the last item. The local ordinance requires that council approve any grant applications and grant awards of over $10,000. This item in front of you was a request to approve city staff to apply for a technical assistance grant from DLCD, Department of Land Conservation Development. This came up after a recent meeting with our DLCD field rep. Megan and I had a great meeting with him and talked about a variety of things that I was curious for background on: urban growth boundary amendment, where the city sits relative to the prior remand, and just general backdrop about what's our vulnerability, what are our opportunities, what should we be, what order of operation should we be considering. Great conversation. And Brian sat in on that one as well, which was great to have the public works side of that too. One of the outcomes was significant encouragement from Patrick to apply for this grant cycle, specifically to update the city's buildable lands inventory. And that is a pretty essential tool that helps planning commission, council, and staff in the community understand where the community is in relationship to state statutes regarding land inventories, and what types, how far out of whack they may be, how much of the infill and mixed use development can close some of those gaps without expansion of UGB, how much land maybe there is a surplus of certain categories that lend themselves to be a potential for changing their comp plan designation or their zoning designation. Just all of those things really benefit from current data and analysis, and that's what a buildable lands inventory would do. So we were very excited that he was so encouraging of the grant application. I would say probably unofficially that our work and Mayor Bell and many of the others in coordinating and talking regionally about a lot of different Coburg issues is a piece of this is some fruit from some of those conversations, and hosting the regional solutions team and all of that. So I just applaud everybody for having put that together, because as the second I showed up, they're all clued in, all the regional players, transportation, planning, everybody is clued into what Coburg's needs and wants and concerns are. And that's impressive. So this is a little fruit, potential fruit. It's not a slam dunk on the grant, but it's a great opportunity. And so just here to request your approval for us to apply. And there is the grant application requires in the submittals a letter of support from council. So that is in the packet as well, as a draft letter of support. So the request would be okay us to go ahead and make application and also approve the draft letter of support, or edit it as you so choose, and then approve if you're willing for us to apply.
Questions? At this point.
Sorry,
Oh,
Mayor, I
go
have a
ahead.
question. Hopefully quick question. I was just curious, with these buildable land surveys, is this the type of thing where we're required to do it so many years and we've gotten to the point where we've come up against that deadline, so we really need to do it to follow state statute? Or is this more of a voluntary thing where we're saying, we think it's time. I'm just curious.
Yeah, a little both. You know, the statutory part is you have to show that you have the land supplies that you're required to have. So you don't, if your buildable lands inventory is old, but you haven't had a whole lot of changes, you may not need to update it. There's no mandate to by a certain time period, the BLI has to be updated. But getting to your point, the other part of it is, you know, you are mandated to verify and show that you do meet state law regarding land supplies. And this is the tool that lets you defend that and show that you do. And again, by not just by expansion needs, you know, amending the growth boundary line, it really, I think the cool part that we were talking about internally is the mixed use code changes you've recently done, ADUs, you know, both of those are able to be, you know, part of the analysis as well, because what they look at is not just vacant lands, it's redevelopable land. So you can look at the mixed use properties in zoned properties in town that aren't mixed use now, but the part of the analysis will be saying what is the build out with our new code, with the mixed use code, what does the build out look like? How many residential units would likely come and at what pace? So that can defend should council in the future not want to do a bunch of urban growth expansion. The buildable lands inventory will tell you how much you already have available through various infill strategies, and also tools to, you know, accomplish it in multiple ways. So hope that answers it. It's not in of itself mandated to be updated, but you know, cities do have to show what their land category capacities are.
And it would also put us, if I'm correct in assuming, as we do the master plans that are required to update, it would put us, it's a first step towards doing those things.
Yeah, I think it would help transportation system plan. It would help support, you know, the conversation of the remand. Because what I think is really important is for council not to be put in a position where they don't have maximum choice, right? So the buildable lands inventory bolsters you with the ability, you know, if somebody comes in for an annexation, urban growth boundary adjustment, and there isn't data that says, hey, we don't need that much, or we don't need that kind. You know, you want to be armed with that. You know, you want to be in as much in control of that as possible. And as we all know, there are elements where it's not local discretion. There are state land use laws, but this helps you obtain and retain as much control over your policy decisions in growth management as possible. It's a tool for that.
So are you saying that if we do the buildable lands, if we do that inventory, does that help us if the state comes back and says that we need to update the urban growth boundary, where we can say, we've identified this part within our city, so we don't need to go out into our farmland or whatever further to satisfy the UGB requirements?
Right. In part, it gives us the statistical backing and the methodology, you know, the approved methodology that is leaned on to answer those questions of, do we comply without, do we have to do this and this, how much of this, you know, how can we accomplish it? And it gives us a current snapshot. And again, the prior one was 2010, which had different, they were evaluating buildable lands based on a different development density than what the current code has for specifically for residential. But of course, the annexation too of the other industrial lands, you know, necessitates an update on that category too. So it really isn't. It isn't only a tool for residential growth conversations, but it's really a tool for the totality of best utilization of land and hopefully as much local influence and control over those decisions as possible.
Well,
Real quick, I mean, certainly in favor of this if we can get the grant, but it will probably expose the fact that we don't have enough buildable land, at least residential subdivision land in our inventory. And I mean, the ramifications of that, it might be that well, let me ask you, is this going to be submitted to the state? Where they are going to then say, well, look, you don't have a 20-year supply of residential land to build on, therefore you need to expand your urban growth boundary, expand your. And you don't want to be forced into a situation of having to do something as the result of doing this. I mean, it's great information to have, but if it comes up and saying, yeah, you don't have enough, and what do we do then? Are we forced into doing something?
I think that's the point of wanting to do it, is to be ahead of that curve rather than not having that information. I think your speculation is probable, right? Because, you know, it's not too many cities that their city limits line and their urban growth boundary line are the same line. 100%. That's pretty telltale sign. So I don't know that it's any surprise. I think it's just a matter of time when, like I said, there is a potential where development proposals have a leg up in getting, you know, having state law on their side and not having this body have control of being able to say, we're meeting it this way, so we don't have to say yes to you. I mean, it's a double, I think, but it is inevitable that it needs to be done. I also think on a little bit lesser scale of prioritization, it helps infrastructure planning as well. We definitely want to know, you know, where the most redevelopable are, what are they projected out to look like. So it's, you know, I take it as a very valuable thing, even if it may make, you know, explicit the current conditions. I don't think that's, I don't think the idea of avoiding it to keep that maybe less obvious. I don't know that helps council in their future options,
But
but
this doesn't have to be turned into the state, or does it?
yeah, buildable lands inventories are kind of a technical document. So yeah,
Okay.
they'll be part of an official record. It's not in of itself the policy-making document. It's the background materials that bolster decision-making. So you can rely on that for the decisions that you're making, and it helps defend those decisions.
You don't have wetlands until you do a wetlands delineation and turn it into the state,
Then
then it's
you
wetlands.
do, yeah. Councilor Fox?
I just, when it talks about the state saying you need to grow your urban growth boundary, Coburg's in a unique position in that we're constrained by not being able to expand our urban growth boundary due to the farmlands to the north, farmlands to the south, and farmlands to the west. So might make the state think, well, we might have to work a little bit with this situation because we want to have a belt line.
No, I think that's, yeah, it's a very good point. I think, you know, and that was talked about a little bit with our field rep is, you know, it's from the state level, you know, they do recognize it's a balancing act because there are state land use goals that preserve, you know, they're strong, that preserve that. There are state land use goals that require us to do, and when they clash, then how do you navigate that? You know, and those are probably future conversations. This one, I think, gives the ability to, with a little more granularity, determine, you know, how much is that required additional raw land acquisition by, you know, not acquisition ownership, but by moving the urban growth boundary line that is required compared to what current code and maybe even future decisions for intensifying infill development code to avoid the need to you know, expand their urban growth boundary line or to avoid those state land use goal conflicts.
Anything else? Wise, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that the city council support and authorize the submittal of the grant application to the Department of Land Conservation and Development for the 2023 to 25 technical assistance grant to update the city's buildable lands inventory.
Have a motion by Counselor Engebretson and a second by Counselor Fox to support and authorize a submittal of the grant application to the Department of Land Conservation for the 2023-25 Technical Assistance Grant to update Coburg's buildable lands inventory. Is there any further discussion? No. All right, all those in favor? All those, I'm sorry, Counselor Fox, I did it again, didn't I? Any opposed? No. So that motion passes 5-0.
Mayor, can I maybe clarify? I just want to assume that that was implied with the approval. Like,
Thank
you know, we may, I may not have worded that right.
You want to have any changes, additions, deletions from the letter that is on page 68? Straightforward. I don't see or hear any questions about that, so that is also approved. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda, administrative information reports. And we will have Chief Larson do the quarterly report from the police. I like the graphs, by the way. They're starting to make a lot more sense to me.
Thank you. I didn't do it.
Well, it's wonderful.
Ann did it for me before she left.
I
So
see.
I thanked her.
Thank you, Ann.
So this is the April, May, June quarterly report. As you know, we divide our activity into 7 different categories, which are on page 71. In the middle of 71, you could see that traffic stops went down a little bit. Patrol checks were about the same. Property person crimes went up a little bit. And then property crimes went down, society crimes went up. And I've looked at this and I've tried to figure out how to make it consistent, and I can't. Because it ebbs and flows and it's other people that influence that. On page 73 is kind of a breakdown of how the police department spends its time. And I just want to give you an example of inside of that. We had a rape investigation by Dan Miller, who made an arrest. Person got sentenced to 6 years in prison. During that, he did 3 search warrants, 1 on a travel trailer, 1 on DNA, and 1 on a cell phone. He also had to do multiple reports. The suspect was from Utah, was a construction worker traveling. The victim was a traveling nurse who lived in Spokane, who actually moved back to Louisiana. So we dealt with Spokane PD, Louisiana PD, Utah PD, and he listened to, I mean, he probably investigated that for 100 to 120 hours, listened to hours of jail tapes that you never want to listen to. But that's sometimes what it takes to make the criminal case. So that's just kind of a deeper dive into an example of how we do spend some of that time. And then going with the outside influence in 1 week, we dealt with on July 31st on a Monday. We had probably the busiest week I've ever had since I've been here. And it was something. Officer Lee made a traffic stop, Sergeant Lee made a traffic stop at Chiefs, and the guy ran. Ended up down here at Abbey and Austin. We had OSP, EPD, LCSO, we had drone, we could not find him. He was from Texas. His girlfriend was from Ohio. We dealt with him for a couple of days. On Tuesday, he they broke into a house on Bottom Loop. He ran again. We had a drone. We had or it was a Lane County call. We assisted them. We didn't catch him that night either. Then on Wednesday, we ended up talking to another guy behind Trinity Lane. No, he was by the Shell gas station. Had a knife in the small of his back, had a bunch of cautions, hostile towards law enforcement, was on probation for manslaughter. He was from Douglas County. Wednesday, we had another citizen contacted a farmer, contacted the guy that ran from us on Monday. Ended up getting into a physical fight. He pulled a knife. We had K9, EPD K9, OSP, County, Coburg. He got away again, but he was bloodied and injured by the farmer.
Those farmers.
Thursday, we had another foot pursuit of a black male juvenile from Washington State. That was actually a missing person. And he had just gotten released from Washington County by Portland. He was a juvenile, 16, 17 years old, high on methamphetamine. So that's why he ran, and he ended up going to juvenile detention. Sunday that week was quiet, which was a good day.
It's church day.
And then on Monday, Sergeant Lee got a stolen vehicle at the Shell gas station with 5 individuals, 3 runaways, 2 were 12 years old out of Seattle. They were actually being trafficked. So we ended up getting a hold of, they're en route to Sacramento. We got a hold of DHS, who immediately came to the scene, and they were at risk that they actually drove them to Seattle that night. So that one week, we had people from Seattle, Portland, Douglas County, Eastern Oregon, Texas, and Ohio. So I've looked at those stats again. I can't control any of those because I would like to see nice stable stats. But if I figured that out, I would be retired by now. So, but I'll be glad to answer any questions about any of this stuff before you.
I'll add real quick that was my first week here. So
Yeah,
that was pretty interesting. Well, that's just normal, I guess. I guess not.
Yeah, it's not normal.
You had the Price Borough Fire, you had all of the
Yeah.
police activity. Thank you for staying.
John.
Councilor Lehman.
We did have a conversation that we might have an interest in obtaining a drone for our police department.
Well, I need to do some more research because I'm not sure. Actually, I have a police magazine over there that talks about drones. I'm not really that familiar with it. It looks like a fantastic tool. Actually, when we were out by the rock quarry looking for the suspect that ran, the citizen had a personal drone up videotaping Kevin and I out there. But you know, it can cover so much ground so much faster. And actually, on Bottom Loop, when we have the sheriff's department, it actually had a FLIR, the heat thing, and one that the county has. So I'll do some more research on. I'm not sure what it takes.
Councilor Smith. Does the fire department have a floor that they have?
We have a handheld FLIR. We don't have a drone FLIR.
Okay.
We got one from the US Marshals a couple of years ago.
Fox.
Just a note, your future assistant with graphs and pie charts, could we just have black fonts rather than yellow?
Other things that people over 25 might not be able to.
Adam, can you help me on
I
that?
can even read this, Councilor Fox.
I took that note. I'll take that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Busy. Our police department is busy, and I'm gratified to see that it's 61% is spent out on activity and patrol. And I think that that's something that we can certainly share with our community members, because it seems like we never have enough police, and they're never where we want them when we want them. But they really, most of their time, even in spite of all of the time that it takes to investigate and do all of the other stuff, most of the time, over 50% of the time is spent out there on patrol. So that's good. Good to know and good to share.
Mayor Bill,
Yes.
I think that, you know, I wasn't aware of how police time was broken down until I had access to the city administrator report. Council, I think that it's important because I hear it all the time, our cops don't do anything, they
Mhm.
never do this, and everybody's.
Never anywhere.
I think that if we do start the newsletter again, that there needs to be a page in the newsletter that shows this, so the community does see, maybe not all of the nuts and bolts of the
Solution.
calls, but this graph or the number of calls that they go on each month. I think that that would be helpful because I don't think our basic community thinks that we're a little town where nothing ever happens.
That's
and
right.
Why does a policeman not show up when I do this? And I think it would be helpful for that to be a part of our public
Good point.
newsletter.
I agree
Have a
with you.
YouTube channel, Chief
Yeah.
Larson.
No, we're gonna put Sergeant Lee on the YouTube channel. Okay, did you want to talk about the abstention vote information, Mr. Hanks?
Sure, and Sammy can chime in too. I think it was just more of an FYI, just a refresher for some and maybe some new information for others on just some of the major categories of the rules and voting and quorum and all of that. Abstention rules are slightly different in different communities. I think many communities will get very specific about that here. Looks like it's Robert's rules is what it leans to for abstentions. My history of that is, I think the abstentions in other places I've been are really reserved for either potential or actual conflicts of interest, which that's a kind of a next layer to this report. And I think I've heard that that's something you guys do some training on in the February retreat. Often those kinds of things come up, and declaring a potential conflict of interest doesn't in of itself require an abstention. An actual conflict of interest does, and there are state definitions for the difference between a potential and actual. I think overall, I just think it's good to know where it stands in terms of this local body's current rules for that, and it does allow them without having to kind of enter that category of potential or actual conflict of interest. I think from a practical standpoint, it's always healthy to kind of describe as much as you can why and reserve it for when it's particularly important, even though it's a bit more liberal here than I've seen in other places. So Sammy put this together and I thought it was just a nice little info reminder sheet, and we can dive in on that or any other stuff when we start talking about prepping for the February retreat. If there's any particular outside legal team or any other expert in the field of any aspect of governance that you're interested in, we could look to incorporate that.
Mr. Fox.
I'm curious, not about the abstention part, but about voting no. I was never aware that Robert's rules said that you had to explain your no vote. Discussed amongst council, but is that a council rule that was voted on?
So it is council rule. Council, so in the rules of governance that council adopted in 2014, that's one of them.
2014. It said 2022. I'm like,
2022 is your charter, and just to add on to what Adam had said, our charter was very specific and would not allow or accommodate for an abstention. I can't remember the exact words, but that changed it was removed from our 2022 charter. So it will be something that we'll need to discuss and talk about putting it back into our council rules.
I think the key term on that one, says councilor should explain. We have to, right. But I think that's, a well-functioning board or body. I think that's helpful, useful. It's really helpful from a staff perspective. I think it's helpful from the community perspective to have a little context behind it, but I don't.
Talk about that, but I just didn't know it got formally adopted.
And usually, in my impression is, there's been enough discussion, just as tonight.
Yeah.
That you have the clear understanding of why a counselor is voting no, not necessarily on the abstention, and I think that is an important piece for us all to remember.
And I have been on a committee where somebody just votes no out of the blue and nobody knew it was coming in. You don't know why. And it is kind of, it's helpful to understand what people are thinking as to why. I mean, if they don't want to say anything, that's fine too, but you know, I think it is helpful. I think it's everyone.
And it's helpful if I were not the mayor and I were going to be voting, I would want you to know why I was voting no. And there have been a couple of times that I have voted no, and I have said, then this is why I'm voting no. I do think that's helpful for all of us. Administrative monthly report. And this was, as a reminder, this was sent out to us before. Are there any questions, or Mr. Hanks, are there things that you would like to bring to our attention specifically?
Not necessarily. I don't know how much typically you're wanting to have kind of the recap in the meeting versus the written document. Those were, you know, my goal really is to try and bring this and more, regularly. The one item that I do note there in number 6, it's something, the project list with status updates, kind of we're working on with both Branch, and then, you know, Branch will have a role. Some of their project management spreadsheets we'll probably use as a starter kit. Then we'll add some of our administrative projects, other projects that don't use, you know, them, obviously, just to give a sense of, you know, where are we on, you know, probably medium to high level stuff that, you know, that we'll try different approaches for the more of the routine stuff. But I'd love, as I said in the email when I sent it out, I'd love any input individually about what stuff you're getting plenty of information on, what kind of stuff you feel like there's a void, you're not getting enough, frequency, just any of that stuff. But, you know, and then I'll also, you know, send out emails just when there's, you know, when I feel like there's 4 or 5 things, maybe, you know, there's things that kind of clump up, and I can every week or 2-ish in addition to this. So all ears to any input you want to throw my way and our way, because it is really a compilation as well from the rest of the team. And you know, I think there's some conversation we've had internally about maybe how to formulate some of these department statistics, maybe in a more absorbable way, snapshot sort of way. But more to come, and I'd love your input. But and then obviously I'll answer any questions on the highlighted narrative that I brought up.
Yes, could Brian give a little update on the drainage project, and also where are we on the completion of the crack sealing and seal coating?
Absolutely.
I can do the crack sealing and seal coat first. Those projects have been completed. And the final walkthrough has been done. We're just gonna move on into next year. We have some planning to do for those preservation projects and where they're going to be located. So over the next few months, Adam and I will sit down and go over that. Drainage project is kind of slowed down right now. The dump truck is in the shop. We lost an injector and a module that controls the injection pump. So parts are 2 weeks out. So we're having to hire Mid-State to Vactor, which is more expensive and more time consuming, but we want to stay on track and try and get that project wrapped up. So it should be October 15th is the completion date for our portion of the drainage project.
So is this what you did earlier, where you had a level surface on the right of way, you dug it out, then did a swale with larger gravel, or just kept it flat?
It's flat. So what we do is we go down about 4 feet in a certain area. 4 feet is usually in that area of Shane and Rustic and Sarah Lane. That's about where Bar Run is. We put in the 3-inch open rock, put a layer, put the filter fabric down, and then we put the smaller open rock on the top of that and bring it to the surface. So far, in every spot we've done, there is no standing water anymore in those areas that usually, when it rains, have 4 to 8 inches of standing water.
How many lineal feet would you guess that whole project was? in those three
Oh,
streets?
boy. Quite a bit. It's hard for me to quantify it because we've done Rustic and now we've done Shane as well. So they're just right on the outside edge of Shane and Sarah. And we plan on turning and going down Sarah, but I don't think we're gonna hit a window that we want. Because we have other projects that we need to get done. So we may have to come back and get that stretch from Shane to Rustic, right by where they put the mailboxes. We might have to do that maybe in the spring.
And then over on Abbey Road, that cuts across the whole street when it.
Yes, so
Mackenzie comes into
yep.
Abbey.
yes, so if you live in the Austin and Abbey area, your areas are next when we start talking about doing these drainage projects. It is important to the integrity of the road base and the asphalt to get that standing water off of the surface. So we know, and we're moving as fast as we can to get to those spots. So
Just call that Lake Mackenzie. Or
was
Lake Abbey,
First
depending on
built, we
which way.
referred to it as Underwater Village.
That's right.
Thank you.
you bet. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, Northwest Natural did a repair on Delaney and Coleman. And when they were done, they did an abysmal job of paving it. And I walked by tonight and it's been all fixed. Was that a citizen complaint? You don't know?
No, so a lot of times, it's a great question. I'm glad you brought this up because a lot of times what the crew will do is they will kind of scab it back in after, because I believe it was an emergency repair.
Yeah, well, they were there for a couple of days.
Yeah, so and then there could be other areas where their hot mix or their subcontractor that does that will come back in and then fix the area. So we know that they're in there. And there's actually one on my desk right now from Northwest Natural to go out and inspect the work that they've done. And if it's not up to standard, then we call them and bring it back. Northwest Natural, Pacific Power, eWeb or ePUD, they're all very, very good about making it the way it's supposed to look. So if it wasn't,
Oh, it wasn't, it was a mountain.
but it is now, I think sometimes that's how they do that in the moment with the equipment that they have. They scab it in and then come back later for the major finish.
Often a different crew, right?
Yes,
Yeah, a
often,
different crew
yep.
will be the ones coming to
Yep.
do the clean work. Yeah.
Yep. Have a good night.
I would like to point out the Pioneer Valley Estates. As you recall, we had a citizen from Pioneer Valley Estates come to one of our meetings, I believe in May. And that sort of opened my eyes and made me start digging because I realized I didn't know anything about really what was happening at Pioneer Valley Estates. So I think, Adam, you've done a really good job of pulling this together. The loan on that we have to put in the initial main water line, if you will, out to Pioneer Valley Estates, that loan will be paid off in 26. So we have a little less than 3 years to sort of figure out what we're doing, what they're doing, what we can do, what they can do, what the next steps are. Because we've heard, and I believe you'll all remember, we've heard from Public Works is that our transmission line out there is okay, but the lines within the development itself are in really bad shape. And our Public Works Department spends a lot of time out there putting Band-Aids on things that simply won't last very long. And to be perfectly honest, this goes back to what we've said earlier in the meeting, the initial contract, if you will, is sort of like this one page that doesn't really spell out what the responsibilities are in the future. So we've got work to do, and Commissioner Buck and the Lane County Public Works Director and the Lane County Special District Manager met with Adam and I via Zoom, but I pulled that together really quickly to say this, because Pioneer Valley Estates isn't part of Coburg. It's in the county. And, you know, can we continue in the way we have been, what they're paying right now? And I will be honest and say their water rates are higher than in the city, but what they're paying and the people that are paying it are not even servicing the loan. So that was sort of an aha moment for me, because there were no stipulations in that original agreement that said everybody that's now currently getting water has to continue getting city water. So some of those citizens, and we don't know how many, but some of them certainly went out and dug wells and that were approved by the state. And so that then the end that was paying into the water servicing the loan was not enough to service the loan. So it's a conundrum. There's a lot of work to be done in a short period of time, but we are working on it and pulling in the people that I hope that will be able to help us. And I'm sure we'll be having, I know that Adam and Brian have already met with representatives from Pioneer Valley Estates. We have some plans to go forward. I anticipate we'll be having some sit-down meetings with more of the community members than just the one gentleman that was here. Councilor Lehman.
Ann made a comment that she wasn't sure that that loan was solely for that community, and she was going to get back to us.
It from the best that I can tell, it was.
That's my understanding as well. I can
Yes.
definitely verify that, and just to make sure, but that's fairly certain that was for that transmission line. And there was some materials in some of the records that Sammy pulled out for me, which I haven't studied all of yet. It's a hefty stack. There's some lawsuits. There's some other things in there dating back to the 60s. That original one pager is early 60s. So it's there's a lot to sort through, and some of the history may be relevant. Some of the history may not be so relevant. Either way, we'll be developing strategies for ways to work through it.
No point in saying, well, they should have done this back when they did this in the 60s. What we need to do is figure out how do we move forward in a way that's mutually acceptable for all, because everybody deserves good water, and but we have to figure out how. Anything else? Any counselor comments?
Well, thank you,
Oh,
Councilor
there you
Lehman.
are.
I scribbled down a few things, so if you'll, humor me here, I'll see if I can.
See if you can read your
Read my
writing.
notes, yeah. Let's see here. That one answered. Sorry about this. I should have been more prepared. Maybe I should have let Councilor Lehman go first. I'm gonna save that for later. I think the only one I was just gonna bring up now that might be helpful is I've been thinking a little bit more about the Finance Audit Committee and how one of our committee members, Terry Dawson, who's been a great volunteer for the city for years, and he's been serving on the Budget Committee and the Finance Audit Committee for a long time. And I think that he was one of the people that was, wanting us to think about having the citizen members of both committees just serve on both committees. And I can say that now that I've experienced the Budget Committee, as well as the Finance Audit Committee, I don't want to leave Terry hanging because I think he has a good point that both of those two committees don't meet very often. So that if somebody's only serving on the budget committee, they might meet twice a year and that's it. And then they don't have any visibility, you know, they're just kind of, hello, hi, how you doing? And then they're gone for a year and then they come back. And one thought that I had was potentially just asking applicants if they would be willing to just please serve on both. I think what we talked about was the fact that both committees have different charters or something of that nature. It would be difficult to actually combine the committees into one committee. I also had concerns about not necessarily combining them because they have different duties. But maybe it's just as simple as saying, when somebody applies, we just simply ask them, would you please be willing to serve on both? Because both of them together are kind of like one committee, or I mean, a time commitment would be similar to a regular committee if you do it that way. And also then the information is relevant to both committees. So I'm just going to throw that out as a thought.
It helps with the understanding if you're meeting more than just at budget time, you know, I'm trying to recall the conversations that were had. I think we sort of ended up saying, well, maybe we should meet quarterly as a combined committee.
I know, I think we
Yeah,
kind of
that-
decided we're just going to leave it the way it was.
We just kind of left it.
We
without
weren't
any
going
discussion.
we weren't going to put them together, but I would have to go back and look at my notes, but there was,
Some had to do with membership, some had
Right.
to do with charter, some had to do whether,
yeah, you can't combine them.
were you a
because of the
voting member, were
charters.
you just observing? Were you
Right.
requested to be there? Are you a volunteer being there?
It's kind of messy,
Are
isn't
you
it?
visitor? Are you acting member? Are you appointed?
So
It
we
was all
probably
those.
need to come back to that.
The reason I bring it up is I kind of felt I probably disappointed Terry by not really like pushing for it a little bit more. And as I said, I think what I just said now would be a nice compromise where we could have the effect of allowing people to be a little bit more involved and
We have to tighten it up. But the bureaucratic gobbledygook that.
Sam.
Because I thought it was such a good idea. I got lost. in
I
the-
guess what I'm proposing is to think about is the committees still stay separate, which I think is the right thing. We just ask the citizen members to please. Hey, you came to join the finance audit committee or apply. That's wonderful. Would you please also apply to the budget committee? And just a quick explanation about why they're related. We do have to have separate committees. You meet and talk about slightly different things, but the time commitment is going to still be less than probably 12 meetings in a year, you know, even with the two combined. And
Nominate Counselor Engelbert. to take the office.
Yeah.
Drive that stake forward.
So Counselor Ingebretson, it would be more of sharing of information than a change of duties, correct? Is that what you're saying?
what I'm saying is so like you have on so the budget committee, of course, is made up of the city councilors, but then also citizens,
citizens.
a certain number of citizens.
Mhm.
So those individuals, we would encourage, what I'm saying is we should encourage them to also
Be on
be on the
audit.
finance and audit committee.
Oh,
They're
okay,
two
so the
different committees.
Citizen part,
Yes.
okay, I get it.
But we would just encourage them to please, if you're going to apply to be on one of them, would you please also apply? And we would prefer that if you would please apply to the other one too, because they're related,
But different,
but different.
different
but related.
duties, but
And
Duties wouldn't change.
also, right, each committee would meet, you know, when they came to the budget committee, they'd be sitting on the budget committee. When they came to the finance audit committee, they'd be sitting in that finance audit committee meeting. And then, like I say, they're related information, but different tasks. But then also the time commitment. I think that's the other thing, you know, such a small number of meetings for the budget committee. And then the finance committee is only 4 meetings a year usually. So when you combine those, you're still, you know, maybe 8 meetings a year, which just rounds things out a little bit more and allows people to kind of participate through the year instead of just like 2 meetings in the spring.
I'm sure this has been talked about before in these conversations, but that scenario does keep clear of ORS requirements because budget committee is all governed by Oregon revised statutes, whereas there is a little bit on the audit, but that scenario kind of keeps those clean. And then you can, it's a local decision that you're talking about only about having having people, the same person appointed to multiple committees, which unless there's something in the charter or council rules for that, I've seen that in one city, but it's not common. Normally it is allowed that the appointments can be made for multiple committees. Sometimes smaller places, it's kind of essential that people commit to more than one committee. So
We'll have to sort of take a look at the charters and the rules involved and then make that recommendation. And of course, I'm going to say this and again, we're going to have to check, but I think that we on council could certainly go to any audit and finance committee meetings. And that would then better prepare us, myself, me, when we get to the budgeting meetings also.
We have a liaison from city council to that meeting.
We do, and that's Counselor Wells.
Okay.
I got on that committee. No idea.
Because you have good financial sense.
No, I know.
Then you will.
It was one of the meetings I didn't attend and I got appointed. Yeah, you did that.
Well, it's a 1-year commitment. And then we'll move them around and we do, I certainly do. People put in their preferences to what they want to be on it, but we do move around. I learned a lot by being on the planning committee as a counselor because I really didn't know much at all about what planning commissions did. And so it was very helpful for me to learn a little bit. Councilor Lehman.
Yeah, I was talking with Mike Watson. Mike used to be on city council and was past president of this council. And he wanted me to kind of share this scenario. He thought that we were having a wedding up here when all the chairs were laid out because earlier this summer there was a wedding out there, but I think it was all for the Coburg Fair. And he relayed to me that he recently paid $10,000 for a venue for a wedding. He says it's not that uncommon. When you have 100, 150 people, you set aside a park or you go to a venue where they set up for weddings. And he says, well, I think we only have a $75 fee for park. And raise the questions, do we just have a flat fee? Is it on a sliding scale? Does the purpose change the fee, the number of people, the time frame? He was saying, I think the word's going to be getting out here. If you want to have an inexpensive wedding, go to Coburg and you can tie up the park for a day. And he was wondering, are we going to be limiting local citizens' use of the park for wedding venues and the work and time that staff puts in versus revenue generated from that? So I think that just should be some kind of a conversation going forward, council.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a special event. There's several different triggers on there, a special event application. So the wedding there did trigger the special event application. I believe it's anytime there's more than 50 people that's going to be there. So then you're going to take what special event application is triggered. It's a $200 application fee that's routed through administration, public works, police, and fire. They all can assign fees, depending on what the cost is going to be for the departments and do it. We used to have about 8 to 10 weddings in that park a year, I want to say. But now with the city's event schedule, we don't open the park up until January for rentals. There's not a lot of weekends that is a possibility to have. It also requires special insurance, it's not an easy task to do the wedding in the park. So, and it is, we control the expense of it as we need to.
And I think the $10,000 figure assumes that everything is set up for you when you arrive. We just give them the space. They still have to rent all the chairs and the canopies and do their own setup.
And that would primarily be in Pavilion Park, correct? I mean,
We've had it at any place, you know,
Okay.
we've had
At
them
any
both
park.
at both, you know, retirement parties and stuff down
Okay.
across from Allen's property there. Any public place.
Of course, Pavilion Park's gonna be down. Wow. When are we starting that project?
We'll hopefully have that out to bid October, maybe November. So we'll hope to have a contract recommendation in front of you December, January. We're in that time frame. Hopefully December. That's the goal.
Start in the spring.
I'm so sorry. I thought of another question.
Yes.
How has it been going with the new homeless ordinance that came about because of the court ruling, was it the Ninth Circuit Court? Have we had a lot of problems or has it been fairly smooth? I'm just curious. I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, I'll bring Chief Larson up if he's available, but I'll say my piece of that, you know, I was briefed and kind of read all the materials for the administrative ability to assign a location, all of that. And I just say I haven't done that. You know, if I do, obviously that would be an immediate email to all of you to let you know that that's occurring. But Larry probably has a better take on things.
We constantly get them. Most of the time they're centered around the show, the McDonald's, because they're traveling through. We help them along as much as possible and it's been pretty successful so far. We've had a couple of people that have stayed for a couple of days, but really nothing more than that at this time.
So have you noticed like an uptick since the law changed or not?
It's always
Really?
been consistent. Well, consistently having homeless traveling through Coburg.
I think how Chief Larson explained it to me, their process and how they go about addressing it. When I first got here, I thought that you know, sounded effective and it looks to be effective. And, you know, I think that's a much better kind of place and a role to be than the you know, than having to utilize the tool. It's awesome that the tool is there, that you all went through that process to make those tools available and in place. But I think we're better off if we don't have to use them.
What we don't want is to have our major parks disrupted.
Mhm.
Or our public areas or the sides of our residential streets. And so by doing the painful thing that we all did in looking, okay, what's the least disruptive area that we could dedicate if needed, and that would be then city administrator would work with police and public works and us, and so we would open that up as needed.
We don't have a lot of the necessary services that people who
No.
come and stay require either,
Right.
which doesn't make us attractive for come and stay and make up.
Anything else? Great conversation. I really always appreciate that. And if there is nothing else, I will adjourn this meeting at 8:00.